Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
City leaders are making moves now in anticipation of a major budget deficit. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria today announced a hiring freeze for all non-essential city staff positions. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen has more on the cost-cutting measures.
Gloria had hoped city voters would approve Measure E, a sales tax increase that would have turned the city's deficit into a surplus, but it failed by just 3,500 votes. Now, cuts to city services are on the horizon. In addition to a freeze on non-essential hiring and overtime, Gloria says he wants to renegotiate leases of office buildings used by city workers and monetize city facilities like Golden Hall and the adjacent parking garage. Large infrastructure projects like new parks, libraries, and fire stations will also be put on hold.
My goal in this endeavor is to avoid a series of deep cuts in successive budget years and instead right-size our city services to the resources that we have without the expectation of increased revenue.
The city expects a shortfall of $258 million in the next fiscal year, which begins in July. That's 50% greater than the deficit the city had to close in the current fiscal year. The main reasons are inflation, driving up the cost of city operations, and a long history of using one-time resources to help paper over past deficits. City Council member Joe LaCava says San Diego has simply run out of those budget tricks and has to face reality.
We must cut expenses, and some of those cuts will be deep, very deep. But it is an opportunity to right-size government. The mayor proposes solving the deficit in 1 year, and I know my council colleagues will take that proposal very, very seriously.
The City Council's Budget Committee is due to discuss the cost-saving measures next week. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
State Senator Steve Padilla wants to create a fund to fix the problems of air and water pollution in San Diego that come from the Tijuana River. And as KPBS reporter Thomas Fudge explains, he wants to do it with money from a toll on vehicles that enter the country at the Otay Mesa East border crossing.
The sprawling estuary of the Tijuana River was the setting Steve Padilla chose to announce his proposal. His bill, SB 10, would amend existing law. It would allow revenues from a toll on vehicles using a new port of entry to be spent not just on transportation, but also on environmental cleanup.
So many of the issues in the Tijuana River watershed that are not just degrading an incredible resource, but are having tremendous public health impacts on our community. That should be unacceptable, not just here, but around the state of California and around this nation.
The sewage and industrial waste in the Tijuana River pollutes the air, the estuary, and the ocean, and it's addressed with limited success by numerous public agencies. But Padilla argues there's no dedicated source of revenue to fix the problem. His bill would create an environmental mitigation fund taken from a toll that will be charged to traffic that will use the Otay Mesa East border crossing. That crossing is still under construction and will be designed mainly for commercial traffic. The toll was authorized by the state 2 years ago, and it's meant to pay for projects related to transportation and border crossing. But Padilla says you can't enable a huge movement of people and goods across the international border and not address environmental impacts.
It's the fact that you have one of the worst environmental disasters in North America occurring, and we don't have, in some respects, permanent funding.
Paloma Aguirre is the mayor of Imperial Beach, which is on the receiving end of a lot of that pollution. Her city has backed an environmental mitigation fund, and she says taking a portion of the toll would easily fund it.
By allocating 1% of annual toll revenues, or roughly $25 million to help South Bay communities eliminate pollution impacting our health.
And what do you do with $25 million a year to stop pollution? Aguirre says mitigation can't just be sewage treatment, which only treats residential wastewater.
They do not treat industrial wastewater, which is our most concerning source of pollution that is going completely untreated into the river and into our communities, into the ocean.
So far, it's hard to know how much political support Padilla's bill has garnered. San Diego's regional agency, Sandag, will collect and manage the toll revenue and the mitigation fund, and they have no comment on SB 10. A statement says they're still studying it. The Otay Mesa East Border Crossing is expected to open in 2028. Thomas Fudge, KPBS News.
And this isn't the only recent effort to address cross-border pollution. Coming up, a closer look at lawsuits mounting against a wastewater treatment plant.
Well, we're cooling down to the upper 40s for tonight, still dealing with some of those clouds scattered throughout, but there are some changes on the way, mainly to temperatures. I'll break that down coming up.
Two former San Diego Unified School District employees are now suing the district and its former superintendent. KPBS reporter Katie Anastas has more about the allegations against Lamont Jackson and his successor.
One complaint comes from Monica Hazel. She was an area superintendent in the district at the time. Hazel alleges that Jackson routinely sexually harassed her and that he offered career opportunities if she complied with his advances. Tavga Bustani has also filed a complaint. She held a leadership position in the district. She says Jackson created excuses to meet with her privately, expressed his interest in a sexual relationship, and visited her home uninvited. Both women say they were demoted to teaching positions, which significantly reduced their salaries. The school board fired Jackson in August after an independent investigation found their sexual harassment allegations were credible, but it found insufficient evidence that employees were terminated or promoted based on their response to his advances. Hazel's lawsuit also mentions the district's interim superintendent, Fabiola Bagula. She's not named individually as a defendant, but the suit says she created a hostile work environment. Hazel says Bagula shamed her in front of her colleagues and directed her to cower and bow her head when raising concerns. A San Diego Unified spokesperson says those allegations were not substantiated. Hazel also says Bagula made discriminatory comments about white people. Bagula spoke to KPBS about that comment in October.
There was one comment that I made that was also found not to have caused a hostile work environment, but I did say it because I had had a bad experience with the vendor. So I did not say it to or about a colleague, never said it again, apologized profusely, so much so that a person in the room said, "You don't have to apologize anymore, we got it," and then I self-reported myself.
Bagula did not respond to requests for comment today. Both Hazel and Bustani now work for the Fallbrook Union Elementary School District. San Diego Unified sent us the same statement about each lawsuit. It says, quote, "We have not yet been served. Our council needs to review the lawsuit, and upon that review, we'll take the appropriate actions required to protect the district's best interest." Katie Anastas, KPBS News.
The National City Council has voted to censure a council member who was just re-elected in November. Jose Rodriguez is accused of violating the City Council policy regarding conduct in the Code of Fair Campaign Practices. Some of the issues being raised include using public resources for things like giveaways, reimbursements, and using city-funded resources for political campaign media sites. Rodriguez spoke out about the allegations before last night's meeting.
This, again, is a political hit piece that we are all so used to in National City. The work that we do in the community, having workshops, actively reaching out to community in times of need, I see this as part of my job.
Another issue being raised, accusations of bullying and intimidation. Liliana Armenta is on the city's campaign commission, and she says Rodriguez sent out an email flyer against Trump supporters being involved in decisions for National City, and it had a photo of her home on it.
My home is adorned with Trump flags. Freedom of speech is huge for me. It's huge for my family. And I feel like he's being a bully, like he's trying to fearmonger my family and I.
Under city code, the punishment for the alleged violations include a possible reprimand, censure, and removal from boards, commissions, and committees. In our next Why It Matters segment, we look at new leaders in city politics. Voice of San Diego CEO Scott Lewis explains why we even have a council president in the first place and what's happening with the San Diego Republican Party.
The November election is over, but there are two interesting votes next week in local politics. They will set the future of the San Diego City Council and the local Republican Party. But you won't get to vote unless you're a city council member or a member of the Central Committee of the Republican Party. Let's start with the city. The San Diego City Council will elect its new president next week. Current council president Sean Elo Rivera does not want to be council president anymore.
But I'm really proud of what we've done in the last few years. There's changes that we've made administratively. There's changes that we've made in terms of the procedure in our council meetings, and then some of the ways that we've led on policy, I think, as well, that make me feel really good about where we're at in comparison to 3 years.
Until 20 years ago, the mayor was the presiding member of the city council. Then the city switched to the strong mayor form of government. The mayor then became the chief executive of the city, in charge of most city employees. The move created a new position, though, City Council President. It was supposed to be almost as powerful, leading the City Council as a separate but equal branch of the city government. The Council President gets to decide committee assignments, and they get to set the agenda. If they don't like a policy, they can do a lot to make sure it never goes forward. Now to the Republican Party. A lot of people hope the Republican Party can become relevant again in San Diego County. There are two camps bitterly fighting for the chance to make that happen. New Assembly member-elect Carl DeMaio is at the center of that fight. He supports Paula Witzel, the former chair of the party, in her campaign to lead the party. She's running against current chair of the party, Corey Gustafson, who tried his best to make sure DeMaio did not win that Assembly race. He failed. The two votes will have a big impact on San Diego politics for the years to come. I'm Scott Lewis from Voice San Diego, and that's why it matters.
And Voice of San Diego is one of the partners in our Public Matters initiative. You can learn more at kpbs.org/Public Matters. There are more than 40,000 foreign nationals serving in our military, and most of them are just one mistake away from being deported. KPBS reporter Gustavo Solis spoke to veterans advocating for a federal law that would make it easier for foreign-born soldiers to become American citizens.
You're subject to deportation.
Last month, KPBS spoke with a group of conservative men, mostly veterans, about immigration reform. They didn't mince words.
The bottom line is there were guys that were serving our country, keeping me alive, keeping my fellow brothers alive, and that's why I'm here today.
Robert Blessing is a retired Army chaplain. He's talking about non-citizen soldiers who have become deported veterans. Right now, there are roughly 40,000 non-citizens serving in the armed forces. Those who do not finish the naturalization process and get in trouble with the law risk being deported.
This is outrageous. They fought for us. They swore to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign, domestic. They get in trouble after that, and we kick them out. I haven't found anybody who says that's a good idea.
This is personal for Blessing. He visits deported veterans in Tijuana. And once, he performed a naturalization ceremony during a deployment in Iraq.
And it was a wonderful experience to say, welcome to America while you're serving our country in a combat zone.
No one would confuse these guys for liberals. They say explicitly that they're not woke, they're not open borders, they're not pro-amnesty. They believe immigrants who committed violent crimes should be deported. Jim Sprout is a civilian who recently joined the deported veterans movement.
Yeah, there are people that have been deported that I'm glad are deported. But this is a select group. This is people that served this country. They didn't do any heinous crimes.
It hasn't taken long for him to become an outspoken advocate.
I have to say I was appalled when I heard about this. So much so that I'm very glad to be here, very glad to bring this out into the open.
And if Sprout is the movement's new recruit, Robert Vivar is a battle-tested veteran. He's with the group United U.S. Deported Veterans Resource Center.
The deportation of veterans is worldwide. We had deported veterans to over 40 countries around the world.
Vivar says that most veterans are deported after committing a criminal offense like drunk driving, drug possession, having an unregistered firearm, or domestic violence.
You know, there's no secret, there's no denying veterans get into trouble. Why? Because, you know, they find it very difficult to re-enter civilian life.
He is lobbying for a proposed federal law called the Veterans Service and Recognition Act. It creates an expedited pathway for any service member to complete their citizenship process by the time they finish basic training. The bill also calls for a committee to review cases of deported veterans to see if they should be allowed back in the U.S. Vivar says it's been a challenge to get conservatives to support the bill.
The problem that we're hearing, and we've been hearing for a long time, is that they try to correlate it with an immigration issue. And that's where I think the whole subject gets blown out of proportion.
Instead of looking at it as an immigration issue, he says it should be viewed as a Veterans Affairs issue. And other veterans who have served with non-citizen soldiers agree.
For me, it's a very personal issue. I worked alongside those guys and gals. And
Andy Waters is a retired U.S. Navy veteran. He says immigrants are an asset to the military.
There are people that have expertise and knowledge, language skills, other kinds of things that maybe you don't get. You get what you get in terms of volunteers for an all-volunteer force, and sometimes we can't, from U.S. citizens, recruit all the people that we need.
The bill was introduced last year and hasn't made it out of committee. Advocates now see an opportunity with Donald Trump in the White House and Republicans controlling the House and Senate. Gustavo Solis, KPBS News.
President-elect Donald Trump has named former aide Peter Navarro as senior counselor for trade and manufacturing. Navarro, who once ran for San Diego mayor, previously served as a key trade advisor to Trump during his first term. He served 4 months in prison for not complying with a congressional subpoena related to the January 6th Capitol riot. The nation's highest court heard its highest profile case of the fall today, a challenge to Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming health care for minors. Our Washington correspondent Julia Benbrook details this case.
Last year, Tennessee Republicans voted to make it illegal for transgender youth to be prescribed certain medications or treatments for gender dysphoria, including puberty blockers and hormone therapies.
It was just purely political. It was, let's use these poor kids and these families as a pawn. And like, we just want to be able to take her to the doctor.
In a challenge to the Tennessee ban, attorneys for the Biden administration and 3 transgender youth and their families are arguing for the justices to declare the state's law an unconstitutional form of sex discrimination.
This is a law that bans medical treatment only when it is prescribed inconsistent with an individual's sex. Our argument is that that treats people differently because of their sex, and therefore the court has to treat it like all other forms of sex discrimination.
The state's lawyers argue that lawmakers were justified in restricting this type of medical care for people under the age of 18.
The law imposes an across-the-board rule that allows the use of drugs and surgeries for some medical purposes, but not for others. Its application turns entirely on medical purpose, not a patient's sex. That is not sex discrimination.
A growing number of state laws targeting transgender care have been enacted in recent years, with a particular focus on minors. Though the community makes up a small fraction of the American public, it was featured prominently during the 2024 election.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
Reporting in Washington, I'm Julia Benbrook.
Growing avocados in California is costly, and there are some concerns it could become even more challenging in the coming year. Our media partner KGTV spoke to a farmer in Valley Center who says it would be even more costly after President-elect Trump's proposed tariffs on goods imported from Mexico. Now, according to the USDA, about 90% of avocados sold in U.S. stores come from Mexico. Enrico Ferro worries that if avocados become too expensive, overall demand will drop.
Consumers are going to be hurt, and it will have a negative impact on the industry long term. I think people will lose interest in paying extra for something like an avocado.
And California is the largest producer of avocados in the U.S., but Ferro says it can't grow enough for everyone. President-elect Trump says his goal with these tariffs is to put pressure on the Mexican government to curb fentanyl and migrant crossings. Environmental justice organizers and labor groups in the Imperial Valley are launching a new coalition to negotiate with the emerging lithium industry. KPBS Imperial Valley reporter Corey Suzuki has more.
The coalition is calling themselves Valle Unido por Beneficios Comunitarios. It's made up of 7 partners, including the UAW, one of the largest unions in the country. This week, they held a press conference in Calipatria.
For decades, our region has carried the weight of decisions made without the well-being of our families and the environment at heart.
Daniela Flores is the founder of Imperial Valley Equity and Justice. She says they want binding legal commitments from lithium companies to provide good local jobs, protect residents from environmental hazards, and respect tribal sovereignty.
Any developments in Lithium Valley must prioritize health. They have to prioritize the well-being of the people, and they have to prioritize the economic prosperity of our community.
State and federal analysts say the Imperial Valley has the potential to become a major producer of lithium, a key component in electric cars and other battery technology. That's created a lot of anticipation, but also worry over how the industry will treat the valley's workers and its air and water. Corey Suzuki, KPBS News.
Lawsuits are mounting for the company in charge of the federal sewage treatment plant on the U.S.-Mexico border. iNewsSource investigative reporter Philip Salata explains what is at stake.
It's been a year of escalation around a decades-old problem that's only gotten worse. Veolia, the company managing the South Bay International Water Treatment Plant, is now facing 4 lawsuits for its role in the Tijuana River sewage crisis. 2 of them are spearheaded by powerhouse law firms, casting a wide net for plaintiffs who say they have experienced a range of damages caused by the company.
Veolia has received millions of dollars upon millions of dollars of federal money to operate, manage the South Bay Treatment Plant.
The France Law Group is behind the latest lawsuit accusing Veolia of illegally discharging hazardous chemicals into the Tijuana River. France says the company has failed to fulfill its mandate in managing the sewage treatment plant and has harmed residents. Like Singleton and Schreiber, which filed a similar lawsuit in October, France is using an approach called a mass tort.
If you have these situations where a lot of people are suffering property and or health damage, they need to bring the tort lawsuit to get any recovery.
It's a kind of lawsuit where each client's damages are accounted for individually, allowing for a variety of claims. Law firms usually finance the lawsuits, taking on the often hefty investment and risk of significant losses. If they win, they can earn significant returns for both the firm and their clients. Veolia has pushed back against the accusations that the company is at fault for the pollution crisis.
Veolia's crews are doing the absolute best they can, caught between a Mexican rock and an American hard place. Mexico is overwhelming the South Bay plant with more than it was ever designed to handle or that any plant could handle. And in the meantime, America was not doing its part to keep up with the maintenance of it.
South Bay residents have long been sounding alarms about health impacts from the pollution. These lawsuits may be one answer to those calls. For KPBS, I'm iNewsSource investigative reporter Philip Salata.
iNewsSource is an independently funded nonprofit partner of KPBS.
Well, as we head towards the weekend, we are going to start to see some changes, especially some of us are going to start to see some warmer temperatures day by day. One thing that is not changing, though, are the low clouds and fog that we've had the last several days, really. That is sticking with us. So, again, something to keep in mind for your morning commute, especially. Then as we get later into the week, Thursday into Friday, that's when some of us are going to be dealing with some gusty winds. So another thing to kind of just keep in mind for the next couple of days as we head into the end of the work week. Now, tonight, though, we're dropping to 38 in Oceanside. Definitely a little chillier, dropping down to the upper 40s for San Diego, 43 in Borrego Springs there, and 30s also in Mount Laguna. Tomorrow, a lot of us still dealing with those clouds. We've seen this the last couple of days as well. And like I mentioned, the low clouds and fog, especially in the morning. 67 is going to be our high in Oceanside there, 66 for San Diego, 76 for Ramona, and down into the 50s for Mount Laguna there. Now, let's talk about some changes that are on the way, especially when we take a look at our 5-day outlook for the coast. Here's that warming trend that I mentioned, 67 for your Thursday, but then by the time we get to Saturday, up to 77. Some of us are going to hit some record challenging temperatures by the time we get to Saturday, but it will not last long. We start to cool back down by the time we get to Sunday. Again, seeing some of those mix of sun and clouds throughout the next couple of days. Further inland, we're looking at mostly sunny skies for your Thursday with a high of 73, right up to 81 by the time we get to Friday. And then temperatures start to even out a little bit more, especially that 10-degree drop from Saturday to Sunday. Keep that in mind that you might want to dress a little bit differently from Saturday to Sunday. Now in the mountains, we are not seeing this warming trend. We're staying relatively even with our temperatures for the next 5 days, seeing just a few degrees difference from day to day. 52 for your Thursday, 51 by the time we get to Saturday, and then 50 for your Monday. The desert, we're staying very consistent with the temperatures, 79 for 3 days in a row, and then temperatures cool down a little bit as we head towards Sunday and Monday. For KPBS News, I'm AccuWeather's Anna Azalian.
In a story that aired yesterday during Evening Edition, we reported that the Regional Task Force on Homelessness says 1 in 4 seniors face homelessness. It should have said 1 in 4 of the unsheltered population are seniors 55 or older. We regret the error.
I'm Jeff Bennett. Tonight on the NewsHour, the national implications of a transgender rights case before the U.S. Supreme Court. That's at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
And here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. NPR's Morning Edition is discussing a new study that found male hockey players at all ages are at risk of the degenerative brain disease CTE. And KPBS Midday Edition has a roundup of holiday events around town in the Weekend Arts Preview. And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. And that's going to do it for us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Have a great evening.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit BillHowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.